welcome back to another episode of Handloader TV. I'm your host, Jeremiah, and in this episode we're going to be giving you guys a detailed overview of the 300 Blackout cartridge. We're going to cover some new powders, reloading techniques, and overview these two rifles we have before us now. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and go back and start at the beginning of this story. So, originally, the 300 Whisper cartridge was developed by J.D. Jones of SSK Industries per special request of the United States military. And some years later on, Remington Arms Company, or rather Advanced Armament Corporation, came along and got the cartridge SAMI approved, as it was previously a Wildcat. And from there, they changed the name from the 300 Whisper to the 300 Blackout, which we all know and love today. I personally am a big fan of this cartridge for many reasons, and for all intensive purposes, the Blackout and the Whisper are the same cartridge. However, what's really neat about it is it's capable of pushing a 110 grain 30 caliber projectile to over 2,400 feet a second. What really makes this cartridge shine is its versatility. It can also launch up to a 240 grain projectile just below the speed of sound, somewhere around 1,100 feet a second or less. And it gives it super quiet muzzle report, especially with the addition of a suppressor. So a very versatile and a very fun cartridge. And it also is loaded to an overall length of 2.260 inches, so it feeds and functions very well in our AR-15 style rifles. So let's go ahead and dive right in to the two rifles we have before us now, both chambered in 300 Blackout. As I said earlier, the 300 Blackout is a very versatile cartridge, and as of lately it's also become a very popular cartridge, and I think a lot of that has to do with a couple of things. The law enforcement and military community has taken a liking to the 300 Blackout, and it does make a great option for self-defense and for close-range hunting situations. Hogs, maybe deer with reasonable ranges, so on and so forth. And also, it chambers very nicely in the AR-15 platform. It runs very well, and it also lends itself to shorter barrel lengths, which is a nice feature of the cartridge. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at what we have here. It's a standard AR-15. I originally started building this as a budget rifle, but I quickly broke the bank on it. So, looking at the bottom here, we have an Anderson lower receiver with a Rhino polymer flared magwell here. This houses a Timney trigger, which breaks crisply and cleanly at 2 pounds 7 ounces. I have a Magpul bad lever here, Hogue grip, and a SOPMOD stock. And on top of this stock, I have a Hoptic USA saddle blanket. And I really like this guy. It prevents my beard from getting snagged up in the stock, and it provides a nice cheek weld, and it's very comfortable. Taking a look at the upper here, you can see the budget build here with the Palmetto State Armory upper receiver, PSA bolt carrier, barrel, and handguard. It has a pistol length gas system on it, and at the muzzle here we have an AAC 51 tooth flash suppressor attached here, so that way I can quickly remove my suppressor and swap it between rifles. This particular model of suppressor is an AAC 762 SD suppressor, and for all of our testing we're going to be using this suppressor. And then to top it all off, where I really broke the bank, but I think it's worth it, is this Leupold Mark IV MRT. It's a very nice scope. It's 1.5 power to 5 power by 20. It's got a 30 millimeter main tube, but the really neat thing about it is it has a 300 Blackout reticle in it, which offers hold points for subsonic ammunition out to 400 yards. It also offers hold points for supersonic ammunition out to 900 yards. Now that might be a bit ambitious for the 300 Blackout, but I will say I have tested the subsonic and supersonic both out to 400 yards, and it has proved to be reliable and accurate. Also mounted off to the side here in a True Glow offset mount is a Sightmark Mini Shot Reflex sight. I originally added that to aid in shooting off horseback, and I'm really impressed with it. Originally I was a little bit concerned with the durability of it, but so far it's held up very nicely. And if anything will test durability, it's riding on the back of a horse for extended periods of time. So there you have the AR-15. Now let's go ahead and jump over to the Howa here. This is a Howa 1500, and I joke and I say this is my Brownell's Blackout because that's where I got most of the parts. They had a sale on these 300 Blackout barreled actions, the mini actions from Howa. So they're 12% shorter than a standard short action. So you save a little bit of weight there. But they're a really neat option, and I picked it up from Brownell's. And I went ahead and added a Bell & Carlson M40 style stock here. I really like the stock, it fits me nicely, and it works very well on this platform. I haven't done any bedding to it or anything like that. As of now, the barrel is free floated, just as an FYI. And to top it all off, we have a Trijicon AccuPoint 5-20 by 50 scope mounted on top. It has the signature Trijicon illuminated reticle and parallax adjustment. It's mounted on top of a worn 20 MOA rail, so we have plenty of adjustment room for shooting extended distances with the 300 Blackout or for subsonic ammunition. And lastly, it's held in place here with loopholed QRW2 quick release rings. They're really nice rings, and I've been a big fan of them for a long time. So there you have the details of our build. Now let's go ahead and jump over to the hand loading side of things. When it comes to hand loading for the 300 Blackout, it's a relatively simple and straightforward process. And also, it's noteworthy that the brass can be made from 223 brass. You simply take 223 brass, cut it down below the shoulder, and run it through a full-length sizing die and trim it to length, and you have 300 Blackout brass. This is a great way to repurpose old 223 brass that maybe has a split neck or something like that. Case life won't be great, but you'll get a few more firings out of it. There's also some different methods I personally like to use and want to share with you guys. So when it comes to hand loading for the AR-15, I just follow the die's recommended instructions. I screw the full-length sizing die down into the shell holder until it contacts, and then I go to town and I size my brass. However, when it comes to the bolt action rifle, I have a slightly different method, and I want to go ahead and show you guys what that looks like. I've preset my die here. This is a full-length sizing die to bump the shoulders 0.02 of an inch. But before I get ahead of myself there, what I will do is I'll take my brass and I'll load it up and fire it, and then I will simply neck size it. And from there, I'll continually check to see if it fits in the chamber. And once it doesn't fit in the chamber, meaning my bolt won't close and the brass is expanded to my chamber, I'll take the full-length sizing die, place the case in the shell holder, run a little bit of lubricant on it here, get some inside the neck, and I'll go ahead and run it into the full-length sizing die, bumping the shoulder 0.02 of an inch. And there's a couple of different comparators you can get to measure this shoulder bump. I'm using one from Hornady right here. It works pretty well. Let me go ahead and lock this guy in so you can see. And how I get this 0.02 number on the calipers is I'll zero the calipers to the case prior to sizing, and then I'll go ahead and size the brass and take a measurement. So I know I've bumped the shoulder on this case precisely 0.02 of an inch. I feel this is a best method for squeezing every little bit of accuracy you can out of your rifle. While it's not for everybody, it is a different method, and this certainly isn't the only method out there. Whidden Gunworks probably makes the best bump gauge for it, and Sinclair also offers a bump gauge that you can use. It's their number 23A, but it requires some modification to work with 300 Blackout. And I can't stress to you how well these retting dies work for the 300 Blackout, especially the deluxe set, because you get the neck sizer, the full-length sizer, and the seating die all in one. So with that said, I've already preloaded my ammunition, and for our testing purposes, we're using unfired Silver State Armory cases, so these methods don't really apply to this test, but we wanted to show you what you can expect with a clean slate unfired brass. Got some fairly new powders here, high quality bullets. Let's go ahead and go hit the range and see what these rifles are capable of. Also, before I forget, when it comes to this scope, I want to go ahead and show you guys how well the reticle works in there. So when we're bouncing back and forth between loads, I'm just going to use the reticle to hold over for all the subsonic stuff. And it'll show you where the point of impact is roughly and how well it works. So let's go ahead and go hit the range. Now that we're at the range, we have our Ailer Model 35P chronograph set up 10 feet from the muzzle to record all our velocities. We got our AAC 762 ST suppressor threaded on. Howa's benched in here, and we've got a target downrange at 100 yards. So for our first load, we're going to be using Accurate 1680 powder, a 11 grain charge. This is going to be borderline whether it's supersonic or subsonic, so we'll see how it goes. Remington 7.5 primers and 225 grain Hornady boat tail hollow point. Overall loaded length is 2.240 inches, and we're using Silver State Armory cases. And according to my Kestrel 5700 here, the temperature is 93 degrees. Humidity is 20.9%, and pressure is 25.31. So, let's go ahead and see how this guy groups. So for this load, we're using Shooter's World Blackout powder, an 11 grain charge, 220 grain Sierra Match King, and Remington 7.5 primers, Silver State Armory cases, and our overall loaded length is 2.240 inches. So with that said, let's go ahead and shoot them and group them. So for this load, we're using Hodgdon CFE black powder, a 22.9 grain charge, 110 grain Sierra hollow point flat base varminter bullet. We're loaded to an overall length of 1.960 inches, using Remington 7.5 primers and the same Silver State Armory cases. So with that said, let's go ahead and send them down range and see how they do. So we've went ahead and swapped out our Howa for the AR-15 now, and we're going to see how it groups. Target's still at 100 yards. And first up, we're going to try accurate 1680 powder at 10.8 grain charge. We're using a 225 grain Hornady boat tail hollow point bullet and Silver State Armory cases, Remington 7.5 primers, and our overall loaded length is 2.240 inches. So let's not waste any time and see how they do through the AR. For this load, we're using SBR SOCOM from Shooter's World, a 21 grain charge, 110 grain Barnes TAC TX flat base bullets, Remington 7.5 primers, Silver State Armory cases, and our overall loaded length is 2.240 inches. So let's go ahead, send these guys downrange now, and see how these guys do. This time around, we're using Shooter's World Blackout powder, an 11 grain charge with a 220 grain Sierra Match King bullet. We're using Silver State Armory cases, Remington 7.5 primers, and an overall loaded length of 2.240 inches. So, we got them loaded up here. Let's send them and see how they do. So we're back from the range on a new day after crunching some numbers, and we ran about 200 rounds through each of these rifles, give or take, depending on how much time was spent shooting steel versus load development. But we got some really good data, and let's go ahead and dive right into that. So taking a look at the first target, we used accurate 1680 powder, a 10.2 grain charge, and in the Howa it produced a 0.91 inch group with the flyer, and without the flyer a 0.64 inch group. Not so great on the extreme spread, but sometimes that's kind of hard to dial in with the subsonic loads. And you're not going to be shooting those very far anyway, so I would say that's acceptable for this purpose. Then going ahead and moving along, we changed it up to a new powder, relatively new, from Shooter's World, and we used a 11 grain charge with that powder, and that produced pretty good standard deviation for the subsonic loads. We had a 1.27 inch group with the flyer, and without the flyer it was 0.560 inches. So that's pretty good. I'd be very happy with that. And it seems like there's always one in the group that wants to open up your numbers there. Moving along though, we went over to Hodgdon CFE Black, a 22.9 grain charge, and this load we used exclusively in the Howa bolt action because we used a 110 grain Sierra hollow point flat base bullet, and it's a relatively short bullet, and getting them a feed out of an AR can be a bit challenging, and mine might be a little bit more picky than others. However, that produced some pretty good results here. A 0.97 inch group with the flyer, and without the flyer a 0.50 inch group, half an inch. So all in all, pretty good results there. Then let's go ahead and take a look at the AR-15 side of things. Running along, we have accurate 1680 powder, a 10.8 grain charge, and this time this produced the best accuracy in the AR. A 2.02 inch group with the flyer. However, without the flyer, it goes down to a 0.99 inch group, so an inch. Not bad if you ask me. Pretty good numbers there, a standard deviation of 7 and an extreme spread of 18. I'm very happy with that with subsonic ammunition, especially given the short-range nature of the beast there. Moving along, we used SBR SOCOM powder with a 110 grain Barnes TAC-TX. This is one of my favorite bullets in the 300 Blackout. 21 grain charge. And one thing I should note on this SBR SOCOM powder is throughout testing in both rifles, because we ran multiple loads in both of these rifles with this powder, it always produced very good velocity spreads, low ES, low standard deviation, and this is no exception. An extreme spread of 9 and a standard deviation of 4, to me that is outstanding no matter what cartridge you're using. And with our flyer in the AR, it's a 1.65 inch group, and without the flyer, it's 0.98 inches. So I'm not going to complain about that too much, and I'd be pretty happy and confident to take that into the woods. It's definitely minute of hog. And for our final load, we used a 220 grain Sierra hollow point boat tail, and this is kind of an interesting target. The first round flew way high, and it opened our group size up to 4.62 inches, which is unacceptable. However, after that, it proceeded to stack bullets into a 0.71 inch group with the Shooter's World Blackout powder. And I can't help but wonder if that was a cold bore shot exaggerated by the suppressor or something along those lines. I haven't quite figured it out, but I do know the velocity on that first shot was 1,124. All the rest of the velocities are significantly lower, as you can see. So I think that had something to do with it. What caused it? You could blame it on me if you like, or you could blame it on the suppressor. It felt like a good shot to me. But all in all, I think this is pretty average results, which you can expect from the 300 Blackout. It's definitely capable of sub-minute of angle with some tweaking and load development, as you can see. And we could probably shrink these groups up, and perhaps this is something we should revisit in the future. Do a little bit more development and tweaking and try and get our groups and squeeze a little bit more accuracy out of these rifles. But with all that said, we do want to thank you so much for watching. We do appreciate it. And if you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them below. We do our best to read all of those and help you guys out to further your hand loading knowledge. If you learned something or you liked what you see in this video, please be sure to hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you're notified when we post our next video. And until next time, good shooting and happy hand loading.